seeing so many people. It's not quite the launch, of course, that we were perhaps hoping for. This time last year, I had a wonderful launch at the Geelong Library, thanks to Patty Manolis, who's here today. And we do miss the face-to-face, but of course there are advantages, I think, too, of a meeting like this, because we're connecting from all parts of the country, really. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, about the people who are here from all over Australia. And that's one of the wonderful things about Zoom. That a lot that aren't, or as Stephen says, bloody Zoom.
Bloody Zoom.
So I want to start, though, by first acknowledging the land on which we're Zooming today. Here is Wadawurrung land, and to pay respects to them as the custodians of the land, and respects to their elders, past and present, and to their future leaders. And of course, you'll all be acknowledging the land that you're on today. As I said, it's not quite the launch probably we were hoping for. We are living in a pretty difficult and unusual time, and a time that seems to change from day to day, really. It's something that we're just not really used to. And we're really still getting our bearings, I think. So it might seem a little bit self-indulgent to have a poetry launch. But then again, I think there's a time for, this is the time for words too. Words might not provide jobs for people who've lost jobs or pay bills, that's for sure. But words do mean a lot. At times like this, we look for words, I think, from our leaders, and we don't always get the words that encourage us or support us. So it's up to artists, I think, often, writers, musicians, and artists to really provide that sort of support and encouragement that we sort of look for and need. And if I just want to quote a piece from my friend Joan in Adelaide, who might be here now, I'm not sure, from a little piece that she edited during the week, a collection of poems, where she said that throughout history, in troubled times, people have turned to the words of poets for comfort, hope, understanding, and laughter. The beauty and power of words are needed now more than ever. And I think she really is right in that. So we have a few words today, and just before we do start, though, I wanted to just also say that because of the Zoom connection, it means that I'm connecting with people here that I wouldn't have connected with if I'd had a launch in Geelong. First of all, shout out to my cousins Helen and John in Adelaide. It's just wonderful to be able to connect with you. And Joan, I think, here in Adelaide too, who, a friend I connected with in Melbourne in the 1980s, and then lost touch with, and then have reconnected with more recently. And she actually was the one who recommended that I send my poetry to Piccaro Poets in Adelaide, who published today's collection. So thank you for that, Joan. In Sydney, I think my cousin Priscilla is here. These are people who are booked. I can't quite tell if you're all here now or not. Classmates and colleagues in the past, John Regan, Mike Shell, classmate of mine going back to 1962. Peter Jennings, also a contemporary in the seminary in Sydney. And Warren Ford in Western Australia, who went ahead of us to the Philippines and played the part for us. Wonderful to see you here, Warren. And also in Western Australia in Perth, Kel Barrett, who's a classmate of mine too, and has spent many years in Korea and is now back in Australia. Good to see you too, Kel. I'm not going to go through everybody because we'll be here a long, long time. A new friend, I think, might be today in Rockhampton, Stuart. In Melbourne, Ian Fraser, you'll hear a bit more of in a minute. Anne Henderson, I'm not sure if you're here. And Wendy and Chris in Melbourne too. And we're thinking of the people in Melbourne particularly, I think, at the moment. In Tasmania too, Vin and Trish in the car, doing a Zoom by car, which I don't think I've ever seen done before. So fantastic. These pathfinders, they find a way of doing things differently. And of course, on the Bellarine, I think, well, Terry and Sandra, hi Terry, classmate of mine, and Bernie and Helen. Terry and Bernie and Helen and I, Terry and Bernie and I were classmates back in 1962. and we've stayed friends ever since. And I think we've become even closer in the last few years. Fantastic to see you here. Helen, also, Mary Delaney, not too far down the road, Bellarine. In Geelong, Patty Manolis, CEO of Geelong Library, who's just an incredible support for local writers at the library and in every other way. Good to see you, Patty. My other people from the poetry group that I'm in, Ewan Adami, Lynn Chatham, Rosemary Blake, Alison, other people, poets around Geelong, Brendan Ryan, and other people in Geelong, Surf Coast, particularly the people around U3A Surf Coast that Stephen and I have spent the last number of years being involved with, become wonderful friends too. Down the Surf Coast, Nettie, Sue Crow, Gail, Jenny, Helen Seymour, just down the road, not too far away, and Julie Riley, who's 50 metres away from here, not too far away at all. And why I'm sort of mentioning all people is, what I really want to say is that today, it's not so much a launch about a book of poetry. I think it's about a celebration of community. So all those people that are sort of, all you who are here today have been, still are, part of communities that I've been involved with all my life. And I think that's what we're celebrating today, the power and the strength of community and the support and the generosity of communities. And I think that's what we need to hang on to in these days that are so difficult. And that's what will get us through. So that's what I'm paying tribute today to the community and the support that has come from all those communities. So moving right along, speaking of supporter of local writers, Julie Mclean, who's agreed to launch today. I could talk about Julie's accomplishments for a long time and we'd be here for ages. Let me just say her poetry, short fiction and reviews have appeared in many magazines and newspapers. She's the author of Tango Baleo, 2019, Lips That Did, 2017, To Have to Follow in 2016, Kiss of the Viking, 2014, When I Saw Jim, 2013, which was shortlisted for a UK prize and was also a joint winner of another prize in the UK. Lots more you could say about Julie, but I would also like to say what a great support she's been for me. She edited my first collection of poetry last year, and she was just a fantastic person to work with and a lot of fun. And I'm going to now hand over to you, Julie, to take the reins. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. I'm going to be calling this launch speech, Looking Out, Looking In, because this is what John is doing in this collection. Poets are people who notice, who see things closely, and seeing things closely can sometimes take them to dangerous and surprising places. In these poems, John sees what is there. He sees what is missing. He sees what is cruel and wrong. But he can also be amused, and he doesn't shirk the messiness of the erotic life. I was very moved by the poems in this collection, because through them, John shows us, above all, what it is to be human. Songs of the Godforsaken may be a small collection, and questioning. These are intelligent and thoughtful works. At the front, those of you who have the book, and those of you who will be buying the book, will see that the book is dedicated to the nameless who struggle daily for human rights, dignity, and equality. In the poem Blood Donation, the opening lines are devastating. God will always demand the sacrifice of small children. It's not hard to see that these sentiments are timely and political. behind the mention of ancient sites where children were ritually sacrificed to the gods, we think of today's children of Yemen, Syria, children in camps. Poem Tiny Hearts, there is a wry irony as John juxtaposes two very disparate names. He takes the rather lofty French critic I'd never heard of, Jean-Baptiste Alphonse Coeur, and juxtaposes this name against Bon Jovi. And the two of them agreeing centuries apart that the old adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This book is a reminder of our frailties, our longings, and through it all, our ability to see the funny side. John has captured in this small space, in the words of Walt Whitman, our multitudes. The title, Songs of the Godforsaken, gives songs of the Godforsaken, is a great title because the songs take us to a musical place with reference moved by words like rapture, ecstasy, sanctuary, transcendence, absolution, enlightenment. The first poem, Your Name, takes us directly to the poet's quandary, the difficult and treacherous place that faces the one who abandons or who is abandoned by their spiritual faith. The lines, I no longer call you God the Father, I call you the unknown. The second poem, which I find one of the most heartrending, is about being adrift. It's called Marooned, and it poses the question simply but profoundly, how will I find my way when it's time to go home? John's poems are personal and confessional. The loss of a father in What Would I Say, where the poet regrets perhaps not loving his father enough. There is sometimes regret for not paying enough attention in Messages from the Gods, when an ibis in a Sydney park snatches his cake, and some of us know how much John enjoys his cake. Coming late to the writing of poetry and being bound in a past life to the church, there is regret for the loss of time, the desire for an erotic life, the making up for lost time. There are poems of guilt and shame that come from being God-forsaken. But as readers, whatever our faith, gender or sexuality, collectively we recognize every emotion expressed in these poems. We share grief and remorse, love and longing, compassion for the oppressed. The strength of this collection is in the honest expression of the question posed by these poems seems to me to be, once forsaken by God, or as John writes, whoever's in charge, how do we live? How do we reconcile the past with the present in a secular world? And where do we end up when impermanence seems the only truth? But among the more philosophical musings, we are occasionally brought firmly down to earth. I had to laugh out loud at the title, The Disobedience of the Genitals, and the epigram, "O Lord, make me pure, but not yet." This is one of John's more experimental poems where he plays with shape. In these lighter poems, like Eudaimonia, and I had to look that up, we are taken to places like the Burke Street Lotto, Bell Street Bakery, and in 19 Currajong Crescent, Monica types into her Google search, and I learned a new word, eudaimonia. I'm sure I speak for all of us today when I congratulate you, John, on this impressive achievement. After a writing life of fiction and non-fiction, John has found a new love, poetry, and it shines through in this second collection, which also contains a prize-winning poem. For those of you who don't know, a matter of weeks ago, John took out the Ada Cambridge Poetry Prize for his current and important poem, Survival, which is after the bushfires, reminding us, like all the poems in this precious collection, of our fragile planet, our fragile lives, where humour and irony can still glimmer in the embers. I am therefore honoured and delighted to be able to smash a bottle of champagne on the bow of this fabulous book. Please, everyone, raise your glasses, if you have them, to John. To John. It feels a bit weird because everything's muted and I can't hear anything at all. Cheers to John.
Cheers, Julie. I'm just being handed a glass now.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Cheers.
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 Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Julie,
Cheers.
thank you very much for those very kind words, Julie. Yeah, I'm lost for words, actually. When you talk about it, it sounds like somebody else that you're talking about. That's all I can say. And it's wonderful when poems do connect. So thank you very much for that feedback. But thank you particularly for your support over the last few years. That means an awful lot to me.
Pleasure.
We did lose you there a few times. Well, I did, unfortunately. And there were some suggestions about people turning off their, well, both their cameras and their microphones. That might, I don't know if that'll work. That might be worth doing. I'm just going to read a couple of poems before other people read. And this first poem I'm going to read, it's on page 24 of the collection, if you've got it in front of you. And the title is July the 20th, 1969. I should explain the background. July the 20th, 1969, which was actually 51 years ago last Sunday, was the day I said my first Mass in Adelaide after becoming a priest. And then we came home and watched the men walking on the moon. So this is my response. That day I first raised up the host, it dazzled me, miraculous, moon-like, numinous, a metaphor of vertigo, branded me a priest forever. Ignition and liftoff became transubstantiation. How we canonized those Apollo men, their sanctified ascensions, Neil's forever footprints, relics in lunar dust, beside the windless sea of tranquility. Each step, a stenciled incantation to hope. Conquest, be more than earthbound, to colonize the very heavens. The ambitions of Icarus melted too. Hubris, that mighty force of gravity, drags us back to earth and dung. Priestly robes discarded, the monstrance, battered, tottered, fallen. I hanker still for the caresses of that eternal moon. Thank you. I'm just going to read one other poem, and that's the final poem in this collection. And the title is A Year of Masks. I might just explain that I wrote this poem at the end of January this year. So that was, we'd just seen the demonstrations in Hong Kong. We'd had the terrible fires over the summer. And we'd heard about this a virus that was happening in Wuhan in China. And not knowing, I suppose, that where it was going to lead us. And to more masks, of course. And today, sadly, that Melbourne people are going to be asked to wear masks when they go out. A year of masks. Spring, Hong Kong. Anonymous yet uniform in our disguises. We wear our false faces, crafted in the basements of our outrage, against tear gas and elimination. Summer, Malakuta. On days that On days the sun refused to rise, we huddled on the edges of our nightmares, our lives burning, gasping in smoke and suffocation. Autumn, Wuhan. We, the white-robed, masked archangels, engrossed in ceremonies of ablution, ration out each breath from hostile air, as if breathing less might save us from extinction. Winter, the world. In that other room, without pretenses, we mock our other selves, happy to dwell under the dark clouds that herald every rain, surviving in some eternal expectation. And I was thinking today that that last phrase sums up perhaps where we are at the moment, surviving in some eternal expectation. Okay, enough from me. Some other people have offered to read some of my poems, and I'd like to introduce firstly Ian Fraser. Now, Ian Fraser I've known 15 years, because Ian was kind enough to publish my first novel, Towards a Distant Sea, and he gave me my first chance, really, when nobody else was interested in it. So it's lovely to have you here today, Ian. And I think you're going to read the first poem in the collection.
Your name. So it's true what they say, that you are everywhere, spilling out from under wren skip, swan dips scudding over creek top in late light, behind word burst on page, like a mauve belladonna springs suddenly and glorious from steel-shod earth. Yet, when I call you God, you stay silent. You have a new name, a secret name. I heard once as a door was closing inside a dream, but when I awoke, your name was as a spider web stretched across a tea tree path. Miraculous for a moment, then gone. I no longer call you God the Father. I call you the unknown.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, John.
Our next reader is John Hindmarsh, better known to me and many others here as Ben Hindmarsh, but I've known since 1965, and we worked together in the Philippines for about 10 years in neighbouring parishes, and it's fantastic now that we've stayed such good friends, even though for some reason or other John and Tricia in Tasmania, maybe that was a good choice, I don't know. Anyway, it's lovely to have Ben and Trish here today too, from their car, a reading from their car somewhere in Tasmania, and John's going to be reading too. Thanks, John. Ben.
Thanks, John, and congratulations again. This is marooned on page 6. Marooned between the generations, which neither parent nor child. How will I find my way when it is time to go home? Will I surrender to the drug of memory, await the tingling of sanctuary bells to guide me, or search blindly for the untethered kisses of phantom lovers? Or in the end, will my Father's arms reach out through the years, lifting me up where pelicans soar, to the pinnacled height of stars, the weight of my soul as if nothing? Is that how I will find my way home?
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you.
Right, thanks, John.
Somewhere in Tasmania. The next reading is going to be done by Robin Purdy. And I haven't known Robin since 1965. Only the last few years. Robin's been in we've connected with through U3A Surf Coast and the poetry group there. And so Robin's going to read. Thanks, Robin.
Eudaimonia. And I looked that up too, Julie. Thank you. I thought I was the only one. It helps to understand the poem, actually. It's wonderful. In Hollywood Nails, Valerie lays down her hands like a winning hand of poker prepared for transfiguration. At the end of Ocean Boulevard, Trevor slips Bruno off his leash like an edgy sprinter hoping for enlightenment. In 19 Currajong Crescent, Monica types into Google search like an early explorer expecting omniscience. In Burke Street Lotto, Grant scans his credit card like a nervous bride overdue for abundance. In Bell Street Bakery, Scott eyes a vanilla slice like a contestant in Married at First Sight, anticipating happiness. Human beings being human, expecting transcendence.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin.
That's my pleasure.
The fourth reading today is going to be done by Lynn Chatham. Now, Lynn and I have known each other, I think, over 20 years. We've been looking at each other's writing all those years and making suggestions, and Lynn has been a great support in my writing too. I think Lynn's going to read Blood Donation. Thanks, Lynn.
And the notes under this read, after reading stanzas written in dejection near Naples by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Gods will always demand the sacrifice of children. Copper culture, Moloch and Tanichi refused rain for crops without the blood of infants. Now, as blood paints red the blue floor tiles of mosques and body parts of children are rendered insoluble jigsaw pieces in the aisles of churches, gods require blood still. Would that I could weep away this purple noon's transparent might, be swallowed up in shadowed shame.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say a few more words, John.
Sure.
That's a very moving, hard-hitting poem, as Julie referred to earlier. But I just wanted to add something about my own choice of that poem. So there's a phrase in that poem, this purple noon's transparent might, which comes directly from Shelley's poem. And you may know that that's the title of an Australian painting by Arthur Streeton, which if the technology works, I'm just going to show you. That work?
No.
Okay. Okay.
You want to
It's
share
all
the
right.
screen?
Yeah.
I don't know whether you can you?
Right. Can you
Technology might beat us.
okay. You can't see that?
No.
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 But
Share
Give us the
screen,
information.
right?
if you give us the title, we can look it up, can't we?
Okay. Oh, I can't see anyone now. Sorry. What have I done?
We're here. We're still here.
Okay. Anyway, you can hear me? You can-
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. So that's the title of this famous painting by Streeton, which was painted, of course, at midday. It's got a lot of heat in it and distance. And Arthur Streeton was born near Geelong at Mount Dunedin, and I actually went to an unveiling of a monument to him a few years ago. So that's my little take on that very moving poem.
Oh, thanks, Lynn, for all those interconnections. I'm a great believer in synchronicity and how all these things interconnect. I think life's full of those sort of connections. Thanks for pointing that out. Thank you. And the last reading today is from Wendy Fleming. Wendy is also in the poetry group that I belong to in Geelong, and also a member of Melbourne Poets Union, who published my first collection last year. I think, Wendy, you've got your mic on. You might have to unmute yourself first. Yeah, you're right now, I think.
Okay.
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay. The poem I'm reading is called Under Construction. And I found it very moving. Anyway, it's talking about John's discovery of who he is. Under construction, I plunged into the dark streets of bruised St Kilda in 1980, skated over rooftops. That year I left the castle. Stunned by the weight of longing, I slept with men who seldom asked for names or passwords. I was never young, visiting the bedrooms above the bay for half-night stands where men from Sydney followed, bewitched by some mistaken shape of me. Nights I kept vigil on the Ferris wheel of missed encounters, turning endlessly all those would-have-beens and almosts, my centrifugal desires spinning towards the self I wished I'd been so many years before. I think that's a great poem, John. Congratulations for your whole collection.
Thank you, Wendy, and beautifully read. I couldn't have read it better myself. You really picked up all the feeling and emotion.
Thank you.
Certainly did. Thank you. Well, that's the end of the readings, really. And unfortunately, you have to get your own drinks and eats. But I just thought, if you want to unmute yourselves, if anybody had any...
We'll toast you, John.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anybody got a drink? Toast
I've
to
got a
John.
drink.
Chin chin.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Congratulations.
Cheers, John.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, John. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Cheers to all of you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
You can all unmute yourselves. I don't know if anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions, or it just seems a bit sad that we're all seeing people that we know, but you know, we're all not face to face, we're on little screens. So Morris, of course.
I'll ask a question.
Of course.
Where's the book
Morris.
available and how much does it cost?
Cut to the chase. I've put a little message out on chat. So the links to my website, you can buy it on my website for $8, or you can buy it from the publisher's website, which is Ginninderra Press in Adelaide. But I did put the links on the message there. And someone's put a screenshot. Is that of the painting, Nettie? Did you put...
Did you do that?
Nettie put Nettie very kindly put up a screenshot of the painting of Streetons that Lynn was talking about before. She can download it. I'm afraid to download it because everything might crash. And interesting, Lynn said, I think the name of the painting is The Purple Noon's Transparent Night, but I think the line in the poem is The Purple Noon's Transparent Night.
Yeah.
So poets play around with all sorts of words.
Painted from the Yuyangs.
Painted from the Yuyangs, is that right, Lynn?
This is the Hawk. It's the Hawkesbury.
Hawkesbury, that's right.
Hawkesbury,
Yeah. I haven't said hello to everybody. Lovely to see John Regan in Sydney there.
Yes. Hi, John.
Hi, John.
John, also another student friend of mine from the 60s. And it's just wonderful that we're still connected. Lots of friends from the 60s here.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, yes, John from Julie.
Julie, 50 metres
Julie
away.
Riley.
I can hear
Julie
you.
Riley. Yeah, hi. I'll shout up the hill there, up the dunes. Can you just tell me again, what was the name of the poem that was your prize-winning one recently? And was it one of the ones that were read? And if not, would it be possible to have someone to read it? Has it in front of them? I'd love to hear it.
Okay. The poem was Survival. It's on page 15, and it won the Ada Cambridge Prize for Poetry this year, which is part of the Williamstown Writers Festival, which was all online. And I have to point out too that Yvonne, who is here with us today, we were both shortlisted for that prize. Lovely.
You won, and
so Geelong writers are certainly punching above their weight. Hang on, Morris, just a minute. I don't know if anyone else wants to read, but I'm happy to read Survival.
You read it.
I'd like to hear you.
I'll read it. Okay. And I have to give you the background because about 10 metres from where Stephen and I are sitting now,
Between us and Julie.
is a tree. And about this time last year, we watched two white-faced herons, a pair, build a nest in that tree. And then over the next few weeks, they took turns in going backwards and forwards to the nest. And they had this incredible sort of like walking on stilts, the way they walked across the branches to the nest. And also they made this incredible noise when one would arrive. There was a sort of greeting noise. It was just fantastic to watch. And they did go on. I think they had a couple of eggs, and we think one of them probably survived, but we're not quite sure. So this is the background to that poem. So in your backyard, Julie, this happened?
Even more reason to hear it.
That's right. Survival. She's back again this year in heels and nuptial plumes, coquettish in pale eyeliner, the white-faced heron, selecting twigs, thinking of survival. What rush of rapture bursts? These birds, designed from the templates of dinosaurs, with songs that shiver in the deep wells of the soul. So, despite the cracking ice in Greenland, the rift, the cleft, the split, the spelled, despite the smell, the stench, the stink of burning forest, I see you still, framed by cross-thatched leaves, your changing of the guard, with stilt-stepped stealth, this private pact between you, this brooding hope triumphant. I'm just making sure I say hello to people who haven't said hello to Peter Jennings from Sydney. Good to see you after many years not seeing you.
Yep.
And Renee, I can't see you, but I can see a lovely photo of you. Didn't say hello to you.
And he meant to thank you for the applause.
Anybody else that haven't said hello to? Catherine Ross, did I say hello to you? Hi, Catherine. Catherine Brennan, of course.
We miss you at the cafe.
Yes, Catherine. This is our Sunday. Usually we go to Catherine's gallery and cafe, and we have a lovely time. We miss it very much. And Fran Griff, did I say hello to you?
Hi, John.
And Renee's camera's on the blink, but she's been waving wildly and drinking lots of red wine and hasn't fallen off her chair yet. Hello, Gail. I hope I haven't left anybody out. Any other comments or questions at this stage? Stuart in Rockhampton, I can see you, but I can see you're here, I think, but I can't see you. But welcome.
Hi, Jack. It's a great invitation to contemplation. We have to soak through this and let it soak through us. Lovely.
Very good.
Well said.
Well,
I've got a question.
Renee has just a moment. Hang on, Morris.
Thank you.
Renee's got a question. Yes, she's putting it in chat.
No, I can actually.
Oh, you can speak. Okay.
It's just my camera that. I wonder if you would tell us about the genesis of the collection. I'm sure that you have lots of other poems on the cutting room floor, tucked away in the bottom drawer, or maybe even in a top drawer. How did you decide on these poems for this collection?
Thanks, Renee, for that question. To introduce Renee, lives not too far away from here too, and Renee's been a great support to my writing. She edited my novel Estuary, and she was a fantastic editor and really helped to make it the book that it was. It sort of feels like they came together accidentally. There were just, a whole lot of new poems that I'd written probably from the end of last year to the beginning of this year. And my friend from Adelaide, I think is not able to be with us today, Joan, had read some of them and just said she knew a publisher in Adelaide that might be interested, and suggested sending them off. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I can actually divulge too, I think, publicly that this is a small collection, but I'm now in the process of having a full collection published by the same publisher in Adelaide, which will be out before the end of the year. So that's, I think, over about 100 poems.
That's excellent news, John. Very good to hear it.
So it's been a good year for poetry for me anyway, even though it's been such a strange year for all of us. Any other?
Does that answer your question, Renee?
Does that answer my question? Not really, but it's good enough.
I didn't think it did. Make him say more. Make him say more.
Everybody needs a teacher beside them to bring to the point. I probably should add, I know how some people sort of write themed books, but I think I just write about my preoccupations, really, which is sort of putting yourself out there in a confessional sort of way, really. But yeah, I write about my preoccupations, and I don't know, then I had to come up with a title, really. I'm not a person who starts with a title and then fits the poems in around a title. Well,
and it's an title. It's an excellent title for this collection, John.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you. Yeah, I probably should say something about the title. Godforsaken is a terrible word in a way, but I think for me, I do write about, people who are sort of forgotten and left out. Particularly, I suppose I'm referring to the poem on page 23, Falling, about the asylum seeker hid away in the 747 and fell out of the wheel cavity over Heathrow and fell into a back garden. To me, sort of symbolises people, who can be forsaken and forgotten. But at the same time, it reflects my own spiritual beliefs, I think, sense of being God-forsaken, having forsaken perhaps the old institutional God, but found another God that is much more satisfying and much more meaningful. It's got that sort of double meaning, I suppose, Renee.
May I cut in there, please, John?
Yes, Ian.
That is what I like so much about your name. When you asked why was I interested to read that particular one, I found it very telling of a person who matures in faith. Yes, a lot of your work is spiritual, John, and that one maturing or a mature spirituality, not a naive. That was my feeling about that poem.
Well said. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, that certainly was, that's how I felt. It reminds me a little bit, I read something sort of in the last week or so about writing poetry, that people write poetry to find meaning in past events. At the time you don't really understand what's going on, but it's looking back and writing about them that you sort of realise what that was about. So often I think, write to find out the truth of something in the past, or it's about discovery and sort of finding out about things, I think.
Now, Morris, do you have your question?
Actually, it's been answered. I was going to ask him
All right.
whether he still regards himself as a religious poet, and it's sort of been well canvassed already.
All right. All right.
Yeah, he is a religious poet in the sense of using spirituality as one of the things that he, however you, I suppose, as a religious poet, he fulfills both the idea of religious faith, but also the poetry expresses as we've heard, a point in a religious journey between of maturity. So even though there's references to your early life as a priest, the content of the poem seems to go beyond that in the sense of, as has been pointed out by Ian, it's a mature spirituality rather than a pure faith following spirituality.
So could we equate this to Rupert Brooke?
He was a spiritual, wasn't he?
Well, I'm thinking more of Australian religious poets.
Oh, sorry.
Such as Les Murray has put together in a book of Australian religious poetry. John would get into that, I think.
But just add, thanks, Morris, for that. Just to add to that, that makes any sense. Even though I've moved away from the institutional church pretty much entirely, but I can't help being affected by the words of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, they were, for me, my first poetry. I think the poetry in the Old and the New Testament is just beautiful. And also the words of the liturgy, Catholic liturgy, and the hymns and that, they inform my my poetry for the good, I think. I can't help but be affected by that.
Any other questions?
Pass to the monitor.
I don't have a question. I just want to say that it's marvellous to have been here from Perth and to be a part of the whole today, because it has given me an opportunity to be a part of something which I wouldn't have been able to do normally. And John, I congratulate you, or Jack as we know you. And I found the poetry that I've heard very reflective and deep and thought-provoking and also moving. So thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Kelvin. And it's just fantastic to have people like you connecting, and the people from my past, or in my present really, but all those people from the 1960s and the seminary days and the Philippines and that, to still have those connections and friendships is huge. It's fantastic and great to see some of you here today.
Thank you.
Jack, I'd just like to make a small observation.
One is Peter. Yes, Peter.
One is that you have a beautiful turn of phrase that I never realised you ever had.
Lots of people were like that.
Some of those poems.
Is that a compliment?
Some of those poems you're reading, I was just staggered by just your turn of phrase and the way you could communicate a brilliant idea with about 3 words. The second point, though, in your introduction, you spoke about poetry, your poetry being about community. And God knows we need that today, you know. The ultimate of individualism and neoliberal ideology has to be in Donald Trump. You know, we can see in him what happens when we forget community.
Yeah.
And so, you know, poetry is needed more today than ever before. Keep it up.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Peter. Yeah, I heartily agree. I think, you know, I know you've been part of different communities too through your life, and it's really community that infuses us with the energy, I think, to keep on going, the support and the generosity of other people. And you who are here today, you know who you are. The support and generosity that you've all shown really is, I mean, that infuses poetry in our lives and that too. And we do need words, I think, in this difficult time. It's not just something to sort of while away the time. We need to find meaning, and we need to find words that give us hope and because we're not getting them much from the people that we expect them from our leaders. So here's the community.
Yep.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
There's a word of a holy nun who worried in tribulation at many of the leaders of the world. She says she prays for them all. She says, Lord, may you take them to heaven soon.
And we should all remember that art, whichever art it is truth. People forget that.
Beautiful. Yeah, great. Thanks, Jack.
Speaking of the concise word, I think, Warren, you always were a master of the concise word. Thank you.
Thank you.
And speaking of community, I think my community now is the poetry community. And yeah, it's a fantastic community. I found my place, I think. And around Geelong and this area, you know, poetry is very strong, and the people supporting poetry are fantastic.
Any other questions or statements?
Can you hear me, John?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. Catherine?
I don't know whether this is possible or not.
Yeah.
But I've been intrigued by the story that you and Stephen told me about this beautiful elderly lady, and the word is Philotimo. I'm sorry, Stephen, if I'm not pronouncing that properly.
No, that's perfect. Philotimo.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
I was just, is it possible to read that poem or not?
John would love to read it, I think.
Do you want to give the background?
Well, Philotimo, if you want to know the background of it, I've known this Greek lady who died late last year. She was a mother of a friend of mine. She was 90 when she died, but of course, we still know the daughter. And he went through terrible things in the Greek times of the junta. And, you know, I mean, all terrible things like hearing school friends of hers being raped by soldiers in the classroom and thinking, was it going to be her next? And her escaping around a cliff face, like it was like a isthmus going out into the sea because they lived on the sea, and having to hang on a rope and get round this kind of projection into the sea. She and many others, and some, you know, fell into the sea and were drowned, and she didn't, obviously. She survived. But at some point in that time, the village she was in, which is Parousia, the junta came in and were going to kill all the women and children in the village. And one of the women went up to the slaughterers and said, have you no Philotimo? Which is, you can't translate it into English, but it really means all those things about feeling for the human being and what you actually are in existence. And you only should be able to help and do good for people. And at that questioning, the junta just did nothing. No one was killed. So that was the title of it moved John so much after Rula, her daughter, had told us about this after she died, that he wrote the poem.
And it was really that Georgina was her name. She epitomized this Philotimo. She was just generous and just an incredible human being, outgoing, interested in everything, funny. I don't know, it's just very hard to sum up, but just that total decency and a very unusual human being, I think. So when she died, I wrote this poem called Philotimo, which even says tries to summarize that sort of attitude. So Philotimo for Georgina. 2 bruised white tulips fallen in the back of the hearse. Your coffin carried over scrabble-slipped paths, past the sunken headstones of Melbourne General Cemetery. The golden saints from Athos, halos like bike helmets, watching from their sliding panels across Lygon Street, alternating severity and compassion. Philotima was your life, to honour, to respect, to sacrifice, to be hospitable, to do the right thing. So did your closing eyes, farewelling the Southern Ocean, mistake it for the Ionian Sea, ink blue from a beach in Cappadocia? Changes nothing.
Thank you, John.
And may I just say that the last words, "this changes nothing," was said by Georgina to Ruler when her father, this is when I first got to know them in 1972, I was teaching with Ruler in a school, and her mother and father had come out in the early 50s from Greece. Ruler's the only child, and she was at university, and her father, to get money, did hairdressing and or barbering and driving a taxi. And at the intersection of Punt Road and Victoria Parade, is it? Somebody went through a red light and hit him on the side because he was going through a green light and killed him within 3 hours. And that's when, you know, he was something like 40, mid-40s. And when this news came home to Georgina and Ruler came back from university, she looked at Ruler, Georgina, and said to her daughter the words of John's poem, the very last sentence.
This changes nothing.
This changes nothing.
Oh.
So poets should write about people, I think, too, about wonderful people. Lots of incredibly inspiring stories there.
Thank you.
And thanks to Stephen for letting us know the background. It meant so much, Stephen, after you've told me what it meant. I love the poem, John, but the background fills it out much more so than I could have imagined. Thank you, Stephen.
Not at all, Ian.
Okay. Any more? Must be nearly time to wind up, I guess, isn't it?
John, Wendy, just thanking you for the invitation, and the poetry is beautiful. The depth of the poetry, I think, is quite extraordinary. It's very unusual, I think. And just so wonderful having known you for so long and meeting you in Dalesford. And kind of both Chris and I and you, we were there probably for a fairly short period of time, but to connect and still be part of the broader community. It's wonderful, and wonderful to see the work you're doing.
Thank you, Wendy, and lovely to see you and Chris after such a long time too. We made that connection in Dalesford a long time ago.
Yeah.
I hope you're taking care in Melbourne.
Yep, we are. It's a bit stressful, but
it must be. Yeah. It's a difficult time. So I'm just getting the sun's decided to come out now. It's nearly 5 o'clock.
It is 5 o'clock.
Okay. I'll show you our sunset. I can try it. Can't see through our dirty windows. Sorry. All right. Well, sadly, I guess we might just end there.
With an amen and an hallelujah.
Ite Messiah. But before you go, I would like to say it would be lovely if all of you, I mean every one of you on the screen and the other screen, were here to, so I could prepare something for you to celebrate.
Oh.
But I can't, and that's how it is. But it's lovely to see you all.
Thank you,
Thanks, Stephen.
I should really say, I mean, I wouldn't be writing poetry if it wasn't for Stephen. Somebody has to do the practicalities of living while I'm sort of wandering around thinking of all the good lines. Stephen's cooking or, you know, going shopping or doing
I don't think the seminary ever makes you practical.
Well said.
I'm learning. All right. Well,
Anyway,
thank you, everybody.
good to meet you all.
Lovely to see everybody, and
Thank you.
look forward to
Well done,
connecting
Jack.
face
Keep
to
it up.
face again.
Go well.
Bye-bye.
Take care and be safe. Bye.
Absolutely.
Glad to see
See
you.
you.
Thanks, John.
See ya.
It oops. Again, Robert.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, I love that poem he does about, what's it called? I'm going